Hello, everybody, and welcome back to AACRAO's Credential Chats. This week, we are joined for the first time by an actual college president. We have Dr. Michael Torrence from Motlow State in Tennessee. Dr. Torrence has joined us. He shared right before we went press record that he's been dealing with flu, COVID, just the heaviness of everything going on in the world, and yet still made the time to join us. Dr. Torrence, thank you so much for being with us.
Noah, it is my pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here and to have a conversation that I hope enhances the work of AACRAO and further supports what you do in terms of engaging with people across the planet around badging and the like. So thank you for having me, and thank AACRAO for their support of making this happen.
Absolutely. And, I think it's really special for, our audience, people who are focused on, learning records and enrollment management professionals to be, seeing a leader such as yourself paying attention to this space and seeing credential innovation, through the lens that you do. And so maybe, just to start us off, what is the lens through which you see credential innovation, broadly as well as, for your learners at Motlow State?
Well, thank you for the question. I really believe that uh, aligning things around an aperture or around a food motif probably would make the most sense for our listeners because everybody eats and everybody likes to drink like libations and all that kind of stuff when we gather. So the idea of uh, predetermining where someone can go based on acumen, interest inventories, and the like probably precedes where we are today in terms of CLRs and DAOs and DIDs that still tie into that work. But at the end of the day, the most important of the assertion of skill and being able to identify that. So we look at that as the pre-meal. And so that idea of let's get our appetites prepared, our palates prepared for it. So the first thing is around identification of the skill sets within your community that are necessary to be identified as skill sets that can be asserted and take the least amount of time to qualify someone through a rigorous process of intellectual exploration. In addition to that, do you have the skill set, which we all can learn, to do the jobs that are available today? Not the future of work, not the future of learning, but the jobs of today. Because preparation for the jobs of tomorrow has to begin with asserting and badging that those skills and those jobs are available immediately. So that's the first and foremost thing we look at. That is taken out of the context of linking with a holistic ecosystem at Motlow State that's tied to the importance of our registrar's office,
Mm.
student success initiatives. It's also tied to some early adoption of some things like Handshake, making sure that students have a very clear understanding of how to communicate as well as engage with people written, nonverbal, formally and informally. And we do that by way of uh, interest inventories uh, within our dual enrollment area. So we start as early as possible in
Mm.
engaging with students around the identity and the identification of themselves as learners and potential workers at some point or owners at some point. So learners, earners, and owners is a phrase we like to throw out. And then we move from that to the importance of journey mapping what your uh, position can be, will be, or want to be on this highway to employment through navigating higher education, post secondary education, and the like. Um, we see that as the first quote unquote aperitif that gets you ready. And so I hope that people see that as a pre and a post because it is the lifelong exploration that we're looking for. We're not just looking to identify skills for immediate, we're looking for skills that grow with those who need them, and incumbent workers, as well as those who are coming back to get trained. Lifelong learning, which is something that we've been doing for the last 25, 30 years, recognized by that language, that rhetoric continues. So that's how we get started.
Mm. Dr. Torrance, you had and just so much there that I'd love to dig into, and just something that shines through it all that I think is one of the real themes we have here on Credential Chats with leaders like yourself is, this is so student centered. And I hear you talking about, really an ecosystem of everything from Handshake to the SIS to the LMS, there's all this technology. And I also hear you talking about, pathways, if you will, and journeys and potential paths in a very different way than I think a lot of a lot of paths we hear is places that you need to go or you should go or you have to go to I heard you saying where they can go. And I heard you say something else that I think is really novel that I think is kind of an inspiring way to think about the work we're doing in, noticing, naming, and credentialing, these skills assertions, as you said, is you wrapped it up in our learner's identity. And so,
Yeah.
could you just say a little bit more about that? I think that this is, this is not just, classes you take and some, learning outcomes. This is an identity issue for you. Do you mind saying a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. So we have the honor and distinction of working in one of the larger service areas, as is designated by the Tennessee General Assembly in the state of Tennessee. So we serve literally 11 Tennessee counties, 4,500 square miles, with 7 locations, really 5 actually locked in SAC-COC accredited either campus and or teaching sites. But we're also within various high schools throughout that 11 county service area or that region. And we also have reciprocity with Northern Alabama, one of the fastest growing counties, Madison County, which houses Huntsville. And people will recognize Huntsville as the home of NASA, as well as the University of Alabama, Huntsville, as well as a place for Space Force. So this identity of who our learners are is very, very much steeped into CTE, career and technical education, as well as STEM or STEAM, whatever the language of the menu, because we're going to keep that theme throughout, that is acceptable to our listeners. So this idea of recognizing who the learner is first and foremost, from my perspective, taking a drive through where you live. So topography really is impactful in terms of demography. People are what and where they live. So recognizing that cultural appropriation for developing skill sets that are associated with advanced manufacturing, robotics, agribusiness, CIT, on and on and on. It's not that we are deconstructing the importance of social sciences and liberal arts, but we're also recognizing the marriage that needs to take place. So for us, that's who our learners are. They need to communicate verbally, non-verbally, at a high level, formally,
Mm.
informally, at a high level, but they grow up with a high level of expertise as quote unquote tinkerers. So we inherit tinkerers naturally. I want all of the listeners to think about the first time that they had their blocks and the first time that they had their Legos. That was their free meal again, where they got to sip on something sweet or to taste the butter with the bread before they got to their salad. So this idea before you get to the quote unquote stuff of learning and application and assessment that gives us the opportunity to bear witness to you can be certified, standardized, credentialed in some way, shape, form, or fashion. This is the pre before we get to the actual post third through fifth grade or pre-K through second grade bands, of where we start to identify skill sets that kids just naturally and innately have, and they keep them until about middle school. And unfortunately, in some ways we squash it out of them. But the idea that we recognize that this is who these little humans are and what their abilities can be, that's how we recognize our learners. Motlow State is embarked on an engagement across this service area that I described to engage with people through literacy initially. We engage with the prison, the pipeline engagement at the third grade level, recognizing the impact nationally that if someone is illiterate in third grade, we build more prisons based on that percentage, state by state, and across the country. In addition to that, we continue or have a continuum of training and fun camps that are Lego robot inspired, as well as mechatronics or pre-engineering inspired, all the way through eighth grade, which prepares students for the quote unquote rigor or quality of instruction that they will receive. So familiarity in recognizing who our learners are and the importance of them recognizing who we are as their trainers, teachers, in some instances, confidants, and in better instances, as I was taught by a fourth and fifth grader how to code our own robotic arms at Motlow, they become our teachers. So the pre-tinkerers, as I mentioned before, the tinkerers become the teachers when they have a level of competency to a certain degree. They can teach us, and that further cements the skill sets that they're learning. So
Yeah, Dr.
identifying
Torrance, can I
learning.
ask one quick question? I hate to cut in on you
Sure.
there, but
No, 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 no. Yeah,
with
please.
your breaking bread together analogy, I'm just hearing, as you go even to, not allegorically, but concretely talking about, higher ed, post-secondary, engaging with, our pre-post-secondary learners, our K-12 learners, that through, badges or other, a culture of recognition with your institution that they're getting post-secondary recognitions that are in a way culturally serve as the invite to that dinner table for those
Yes,
aperitifs that they see them that it's and an invite is one way of creating belonging. And so that
yes,
through a culture of recognition, you are actually embedding a belonging to where, maybe even for in the case of an eighth grader, potentially 4 or more years before they're engaging, with your SIS, they may already feel a sense of belonging with Motlow.
absolutely. And constructing formal arrangements, agreements with workforce and business and industry that engages those pre-post secondary folks prior to dual enrollment early and often also provides small town rural America because I would say 90% of our service area is small town rural America. Uh, we have one location that's adjacent to the Nashville airport. So that's our micro metro area. So the identity of these learners, earners, and potentially owners as entrepreneurs, Leos, right? So that gives them an opportunity to actually strive to create space for themselves where they live versus thinking they need to take the opportunities across sectors and across county lines to feed themselves, pay the taxes on the land that they are going to be bequeathed or given or willed from their families, generational opportunities that have been created and sustained. So that's how we recognize those folks. And that ties back to the previous comments around topography and demography. It is an assertion that I make, that our team makes, pull the I out of it, that we make, that's really
Mm.
important about recognizing who we're serving because we don't want to build programs that make no sense and have no alignment with the naturalized gifts that people have based on their upbringing. The farmer doesn't get to run to Lowe's every time something breaks. Just in the same way that you don't get to run, excuse me, you don't get to run to find a nut in a bolt if you're working on an older model of some form of ags related equipment. You have to figure it out. You have to tinker, and our ability to help the critical thought uh, become more and more formalized is everyday skill set. I think that gives small town rural folks an opportunity to be really competitive later on in life.
Mm. Dr. Torrance, I'm so grateful again for just you sharing your genius, your inspiration, wisdom with us, and doing so when you are a week deep into just physical suffering and being sick. And so I want to be respectful of your time. But one last question is, you're just going back to you at the president level of the institution. You are engaging with this at a level that I think is probably at a deeper and more sophisticated way than a lot of institutional leaders around the country. And so for an audience, like, this one of enrollment management and learning record professionals, what do people in your seat, at that executive leadership level of the campus need from people in our seats? How can people, ACRA members who are watching this, take, what messages do they need to be taking, to be exercising their leadership voice to help the executive leaders, be equipped to, know what they need to do in order to strategically and appropriately lead on this space.
Equipping executive teams and the CEO to move beyond simple pontification about absolutes that they may be lightly steeped in begins with the expectation that everybody deserves and everybody ought to have some modicum of seat at the table. Maybe not at a quote unquote cabinet level, but there should be some form of function, in my humble opinion, organizationally that allows for voices of those who don't carry specific titles to be invited to the table to have concretized comments, concretized ideation, concretized desiloization, if that's a real thing, desiloization, I just made that up. But the
Here
idea of
for it.
pulling away, yeah, pulling away from, I didn't know that I could go talk to that person, or the construct of hierarchy, which I think literally disembowels our ability to be successful. It
Mm,
upsets the stomach. Still sticking with food. If you want the main course, you have to eat your vegetables too. Okay, you don't get just to have the protein, whatever your interest is, or the extra veggie if you're only vegetarian. You don't get to just have that. You have to eat the parts that make you. I don't really have a taste for that. We have to develop a taste for this at the C-suite level because oftentimes what we fund is what we believe in. What we fund is what we write down. What we fund is what we strategize about operationally, organizationally, and materially, and quote unquote in our master plans. So the conversation needs to be more concretized. And that only happens when we create space for communication to happen formally, not just at the water cooler or at the lunches at the local Mexican restaurant or whatever the place may be where people gather. It has to be done in a place where it's written down. And now that we have AI to function as note taker and scribe to like frame all of these things and can also be dropped into the LLM to give us a podcast or a brief summary of it. It can be dispersed across the organization. There really is no reason, and to be honest, no excuse for it not to happen.
mm. Well, so that is definitely a powerful call to accountability. And coming from you, I think that there's probably going to be people watching this, nodding along and maybe even clapping at home. So, Dr. Michael Torrance, thank you so much for joining us and wishing you some quick and healthful healing, man.
And thank you. And I'd like to thank AACRAO. I'd like to thank Paige Boucher, uh, and you, Noah Geisel from University of Colorado Boulder, for having me and allowing me to share just my perspective and some of the work that the great people that I get an opportunity to work with every day within this state, across the country, around the wonderful work that registrars and their teams do to impact success for students across the
Mm.
country. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you. And have a great rest of your day. And everybody, thank you for watching AACRAO's Credential Chats. Have a badge worthy week.